Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to First Generation Flyers, a limited series where I share my journey of recovery from emotional trauma to heal my soul. I'm your host, Vay, and as a reminder, I'm not a licensed professional. I'm just sharing my story in hopes to help someone else along their journey of life. In the last episode, I talked about the ego death, where we dissolve the false personality it creates to reveal our truest self. The ego is often donned as a mask we wear to help us survive. But when we get stuck in survival mode and end up wearing that mask for too long, it starts to become who we are, as we lose sight of who's underneath. To reach our greatest potential, our hearts, minds, and souls must be well and connected in harmony to flow seamlessly between spirit and flesh. When one is broken or unhealthy, it destroys our equilibrium and we become unbalanced, leaving us trapped on one side or the other. Therapy helped me unpack the layers of self, to find that my broken heart was about more than just a recent breakup, but about a deep heritage of pain and suffering that transcended generations and manifested in me. The compounding stress that accompanied everyday life, while looking to simultaneously save and be saved, left me trapped between two worlds with no escape. After disconnecting from the physical world around me, I was left with myself in isolation, where I realized I'd been seeking validation of my life from people who were unhappy with theirs. And as I embarked on my journey to become whole again, I found myself projecting my idea of happiness on others because I thought that's what we all wanted. But that's when I learned everybody's happiness didn't look the same. So when my efforts were rejected, I came to realize the only person's happiness I could be responsible for was mine. So let's talk about my journey into the promised land with self-actualization. According to Maslow, self-actualization is the highest level of psychological development, where personal potential is fully realized after basic bodily and ego needs have been fulfilled. In some of his discussions, he describes self-actualizing people as having efficient perceptions of reality and being sensitive to the superficial and dishonest. He also described them as having a comfortable acceptance of self, being independent and task-centered, where they focused on and pursued problems beyond themselves instead of outside themselves. And he also noted that self-actualizers have a continued freshness of appreciation and an innocence of vision like that of a child. As I applied my understanding of spirituality to Maslow's hierarchy, I came to find that the physical and spiritual worlds were reflective of one another, and that our invisible self is what consciously informs our human behavior. But when trauma is involved or the ego is formed to suppress unwanted emotions, they create blocks to our stream of consciousness, which create blocks or imbalance to the energy centers in our body. My spiritual journey was about overcoming the imbalance of my sense of self, which presented as masculine and feminine energy. We're all made up of both, because generally speaking, our souls are one derived of two, that of our mother and father. In a perfect world, we're equally yoked with both, and we carry that balance throughout development until we mature, where we then find a partner of the opposite sex to do it all over again. That was the premise behind the physical connection of man and woman, to replenish the earth. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a sea of broken hearts, broken homes, and lost souls, so our yoke becomes uneasy. My lower self was associated with my masculine energy because that's where my negative feelings of self lived, as a result of the broken relationship with my father, while my higher self was associated with my feminine energy because that's where my feelings of gratitude came from, grateful that my mother chose me. But when she then abandoned me, I fell from grace into the dark side of the spirit world while becoming lost in the physical one, searching for a new place to call home because I'd been disconnected from the only one I knew. Therapy served as a safe space to help rebuild core beliefs that contributed to a negative mindset and image of self, which restored the connection between my heart and mind. Disconnecting from unhealthy relationships to instead focus on rediscovering the parts of myself that had been lost along my journey gave me an opportunity to understand the desires of my heart and the source of my fears. Learning that much of the pain I carried were residual effects of broken homes and family dynamics I struggled to fit into allowed me to focus on healing the pain that only belonged to me. Suffering is universal, regardless of race, creed, or color. And to end our suffering, we must heal our pain. But in order to do that, we got to recognize it. The first step in my healing process was admitting that I was unhappy. The ego engulfs us in a reality that denies the truth by denying what we truly feel. So for a long time, I thought I was happy. But really, I was just distracted. Staying busy because of an inability to rest was a defense mechanism I inherited to conquer the fear of facing the actual reality that I was sad. But I didn't know why, and I didn't have time to figure it out because I was too busy trying to escape that reality. The ego was rooted in pride, and pride avoided the mirror. When we remain disconnected from ourselves, we're unable to recognize our own destructive behavior and negative traits, and instead criticize these behaviors and undesirable qualities in others that we hold ourselves. Pride and humility were opposing forces that kept my heart and mind at war with each other. But after the death of my ego, I put my pride aside and embraced humility. My ego death taught me pride was nothing more than fear of my insecurities being exposed, and that humility was about accepting those imperfections and seeing them as opportunities for growth. Until I learned to let go of the pain and associated relationships, I was blinded by my own rage, standing in my own way, turning my own dreams into nightmares. Acceptance was the last stage in the game of life, as I parted ways with the ego who had taken over mine. Mental illness was my inability to control overwhelming emotions when triggered by signs of abandonment that activated my fight or flight response. But therapy helped me identify a need for boundaries, while spirituality helped me create them, to be better aware of the things that were in my control versus the things that weren't, to regain a sense of self-control. My mother once said, "What we call suffering, God calls discipline." And discipline was about learning self-control. When we learn to control our emotions, it's called discipline. But when we allow our emotions to control us with hurts from the past, it's called suffering. I saw my mental illness diagnoses as a blessing in disguise because it uncovered the hole in my emotional development and the source of my unhappiness: personal accountability. Personal accountability is when you take ownership of whatever happens as a result of your choices and actions or inaction. I put myself in stressful situations and then blamed others for me being stressed. I nurtured relationships with people I didn't trust and then blamed them for being untrustworthy. The choices and decisions I made in life reflected the disconnect from my consciousness. Recognizing this contradicting and self-sabotaging behavior, I reevaluated my blame of others to find what this all boiled down to was a fear of intimacy and being afraid to love because of the power love had over me. Emotions are the powers that control us, and when we don't fully understand them, especially the painful ones, we leave ourselves to the mercy of others, which give them the power to control us. My crippling fear of love, combined with the desperate desire to be saved by it, left me in torment, leaving broken pieces of myself everywhere I went as a reminder that I existed because pain was the only indicator that I was alive. But understanding grief was essential to learning to let go of relationships and situations that no longer served me. After my idea of God collapsed when I left home to start my own journey of life, I was forced to find God on my own in my attempt to replace the love that had gone missing. But I was unsuccessful because I kept trying to force myself into an idea of love that I no longer believed in. When we haven't figured out what we want for ourselves out of life, or how to articulate the love we need, we attach ourselves to the dreams and ideas of others in hopes that they may be able to figure it out for us. Coming from a place where love didn't exist, my mother and aunt created magic. The only thing they did know was what love wasn't supposed to feel like. So they made it a priority to protect their children and anyone else from things they weren't protected from as kids. As I grew older, watching them spend their days serving others, I often wondered who their superheroes were, if they were out saving everyone else. With the weight of the world on their shoulders, they had nowhere else to put theirs. Thus, my savior complex was born. An innate desire to take care of a mother who dedicated her life to taking care of me and everyone else. But all I ever wanted was for her to take a break, to give my heart the attention that hers needed. But she was too busy. There was always something that needed to get done, and always someone else who needed to be saved. That led me to absorb her stress, as well as the guilt and resentment she subconsciously held until those thoughts and feelings became my own. When the pieces that make up our heart are stressed or unhappy, then so are we, because we absorb the energy around us. And if we're a summation of the people closest to us, then I was the physical manifestation of my mother's heartache, as I spent a lifetime trying to mend a heart I didn't break. My mother gave me everything she had to give. She taught me how to be independent, how to be a confidant, a best friend, and how to show compassion for others, because that's who she'd always been to me. But she couldn't teach me how to be those things to myself, because she only knew how to be them to others. So that was something I would have to figure out on my own. After finally understanding my own pain, through learning about the hard life my grandmother lived, I was finally able to understand my mother's. I spent the entirety of my adulthood living in shame for disappointing her, while she lived those days in regret for disappointing me. We were both reflections of the shared pain of not being good enough to be who the other needed when we needed it most. But we couldn't acknowledge the damage that was done, because then we would have to admit that we weren't perfect. And our idea of perfection is what drove us. That is, until it broke me. Invisible wounds are the scars on our heart that's reflected in a way that we love. When unresolved, they become the invisible driving force in our life that influence every single decision we make. If we feel bad, we make decisions that we think will make us feel better, but unconsciously make us feel worse, because consciousness can only project the truth of what's inside, regardless of what our mind wants us to believe. After reflecting on how much energy I expended trying to be for others who I needed to be for myself, I woke up and decided I didn't want to be anything to anyone anymore. I didn't want to save anyone. I didn't want to be needed by anyone, because I didn't want to need them. As we grow and evolve, so do the needs and desires of our heart. And I felt trapped by an idea of love that wouldn't allow me to grow. But the truth of the matter was, I held resentment toward myself for not being able to grow without it. Dependency is the state of relying on something or someone else. To depend is to be controlled or determined by. And I depended on the love from others for my emotional needs and security, because neglect throughout childhood stunted my emotional development. Emotional intelligence is the ability to understand, use and manage your own emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflict. It helps us build stronger relationships, succeed at work or school, and achieve personal and career goals. It also helps connect with our feelings, turn intention to action, and make informed decisions about what matters most to us. My lack of emotional intelligence left me dependent on others to determine how I felt, which left my feelings invalidated. When our feelings are invalidated, especially by someone we depend on for emotional support, it sends the message that our feelings or emotional experience is inaccurate, insignificant, or unacceptable, which reinforces a negative perception of self. Savior complex validates the idea that our value comes from prioritizing the needs of others above our own. Before you take off on a plane, you get instructions that in case of an emergency and the cabin loses air pressure, put the mask on yourself first before helping anyone else. I was going through life putting masks on everyone else, making sure they would survive, when all the while I was the one suffocating. I was placing my faith in others to deem me worthy of life. But if I didn't think my life was worthy enough to save myself, then why would anyone else? My behavior was a projection of my stream of consciousness that reflected the truth in my heart. I didn't think my life was worth saving. I had no idea what it meant to love myself because I had only been taught how to love others. Time spent in isolation, therapy, reflection, meditation, becoming in tune with self and all the things that brought me to the very moment I decided to take my life, showed me that killing myself wouldn't end my suffering. It would only add to it, as my last suicide attempt brought me to my first encounter with God. We had a conversation, and he told me that I could stay for eternal life if I wanted, and I could just continue to watch the world turn from this view above, never having to interact with the physical world again. Or I could take this gift he had for me and go back to make life whatever I wanted it to be and experience heaven on earth. But the choice was mine to make. While I was in this state of limbo, an empty space I called between life and death, I ran into my grandmother. She told me how much she missed me and how proud she'd been watching me over the years. She told me it was time to let go of the guilt for living the life my family worked so hard for me to have, and that living my life to the fullest was the greatest gift I could ever give in exchange for their sacrifice. She gave me permission to live, and 2 days later, she passed away. Revelations 21 verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. Sometimes we have a hard time accepting when death comes to visit, because we typically can't see past the loss. But grief taught me death was the price of freedom, and letting go of the pain was the cost. A lot of Black women I knew had a hard time letting go of the guilt for wanting better, for wanting to be free. Minimizing our pain for the comfort of others because we've been conditioned to carry the burden of broken homes and absent fathers through the broken hearts of our children, which was really just a reflection of our own. But these burdens were weights I could no longer carry. I couldn't keep killing myself trying to save people who weren't ready to let go of their pain, trying to prove to them that they were enough, that it was okay to let go, that it was okay to not be okay, that it was okay to love yourself. But it wasn't enough that I saw their potential if they didn't see it in themselves. It wasn't enough that I valued their worth if they didn't find themselves worthy. And it wasn't enough that I wanted to take their pain away if they couldn't even acknowledge it existed. I finally realized there would never be enough love I could ever give to someone who didn't have enough love for themselves. Only after realizing it was myself I was trying to prove all these things to. Each generation of my family was redefining what it meant to love and be loved by learning from the ways we were unloved. And one thing I learned was that love wasn't supposed to break you down without building you back up. Self-love was a part of life's journey where I found the pieces of myself that I'd lost in others, where I learned the only love that isn't conditional is the love you have for yourself. And when we put conditions on that love, putting off our own happiness for others, it teaches the rest of the world to do the same. And until we learned our worth, we would continue to look to others to define it for us. The 10 years my grandmother spent battling dementia, I spent in the world battling demons, searching for the anchor that I'd lost. My grandmother was the nucleus of our family, and we were all grounded by her pain, but we were all saved through her faith, through her belief that no matter how hard life got, God would always make a way. I just had to find him for myself. The Bible tells us the home of God is among us mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. The beautiful thing about death is that it has a humbling way of reigniting our desire to live. My grandmother's transition closed a chapter in my family, and as she made her departure from the flesh, the gates of the promised land opened as my soul was reunited with my spirit. The death I experienced wasn't sad, but liberating, because what I lost was the illusion of who I was, while I gained the freedom to finally be me. My family gave me the one thing I ever really needed to survive this life, a strong foundation of faith, because that foundation was the compass that helped me find my way back home, even if I didn't follow their path. A lot of us millennials were products of parents who were survivors of trauma, trying to create the best definition of love they could. For some, the pain of the past was too overwhelming to reopen those wounds. But for me, the pain was too overwhelming to keep it locked in. As I stated before, children and parents are merely reflections of one another, both reflecting visions of the past and indicators of the future. And it was hard to envision my future because I was cut off from my past. Although my mother survived her childhood trauma by becoming the mother she always needed, without healing those wounds, my birth only regenerated everything she thought was behind her. And while I was a reflection of the love she always needed, I was also a reflection of the demons she couldn't escape until they became mine to deal with. Demons are nothing more than a spiritual manifestation of unhealed trauma. The word trauma originates from late 17th century Greek, which is a literal translation for wound. So simply put, demons were unhealed emotional and psychological wounds that still hurt. And the soul was the battleground for the spiritual warfare between them, as the unforgiven, and the gods, as the merciful. After trauma, we spend our lives trying to recover by becoming the savior we needed then to those who reflect our still open wounds. But I couldn't save anyone until I learned how to save myself. Shamanism teaches anyone can reach direct revelation or direct communication with God for healing and accelerating freedom if they acquire 3 innate tools needed to reawaken and navigate the spiritual path: gratitude, seeing, and blessing. Gratitude is an attitude and orientation designed to open the heart. Seeing is cutting through the veils of the ego and the false appearance of the world in order to see clearly into the nature of spirit. And blessing is the act of recognizing that spirit is coming through whatever we're witnessing or experiencing. Life taught me that many of us can only see the world from the lens of our own pain. That's why my mother couldn't see mine, because she couldn't see past her own. I was a new generation. I lived in a different world and had different experiences. That meant my spiritual needs were different from the previous generations of my family. For the past 2,000-year age cycle, monotheism, or the belief that there is only one God, has been the dominant religion in the Western world. But the new generation was at a turning point where we were learning to redefine what both love and spirituality meant for ourselves. Authors of Awakening to the Spirit World write, "The new spiritual complex that is emerging is the realization that each of us can acquire spiritual knowledge and power ourselves. Modern spiritual seekers tend to develop in isolation, becoming deeply immersed in personal spiritual studies and finding connection with his or her higher self or God self. Sometimes we have to distance ourselves from the people we love in order to learn how to love ourselves. My banishment from God's house left me in a spiritual drought, seeking redemption from the world outside. But when that world failed to satisfy my regrets, I had to seek redemption from myself." Buddhism teaches 4 noble truths to be released from the cycle of suffering. The first is the acknowledgement that pain or suffering exists. The truth of suffering is that even when we're not suffering from outward causes like illness or bereavement, we're still unfulfilled and unsatisfied. The second noble truth is the origin or cause of suffering. Buddhism teaches there are 3: greed and envy, which is of the heart; ignorance or delusion, which is of the mind; and hatred and destructive urges, which is of the soul and spirit. The third noble truth is the possibility of liberation or nirvana. Attaining nirvana means reaching enlightenment and overcoming the evils of greed, delusion, and hatred. Or in other words, the death to ego. And the fourth noble truth is the path Buddhism prescribes to reach nirvana. I had to learn to forgive myself to make my final crossing into the promised land. Forgiveness means different things to different people, but it generally involves the conscious decision to let go of resentment. And in order to forgive myself, I had to forgive the gods that made me. I could no longer hold on to the anger of my father not being there or the hurt from my mother shutting me out. Because without that pain, I would have never found the greatest love of all, the love of myself. The gaping hole in my heart, that love that was missing, was emotional security, one of our basic human needs. And a lack of emotional security made me insecure with myself. Trauma was about not feeling safe in your body, mentally, physically, or emotionally. And healing was about restoring the sense of safety that was taken away. The difference between being raised on love and being raised on survival was faith in humanity. And in survival, you didn't have much because you've been let down too many times by the people who were supposed to be there when you needed them most. Hurt adults were once hurt children. So how we deal with our pain today is how our children will deal with theirs tomorrow. Because what we don't heal, the next generation feels. Life goes in cycles. We're all brought into this world as fragmented pieces of lives that came before us. And the sooner we accept our imperfect self, the sooner we can come to life. Because when we accept who we are, the rest of the world does too. Accepting my parents and others for exactly who they are and becoming who I needed them to be freed me from the burden of carrying pain that didn't belong to me. Family gave me life, but it was friendship from the world that saved it. Trauma bonds and codependency were just friendships with shared pain. But once we heal that pain, we may come to find ourselves either redefining that relationship or accepting it for what it was, an experience to learn from and move on. Because that's what relationships are for, to help us grow into whoever it is we wish to become. Once I was able to find the love that was missing from within to heal the hole in my heart, I felt complete. My love of self helped me to see past my own pain to allow me to better love others. And I realized sometimes love looked like giving those closest to our hearts the room to grow. Even though I may not have needed people the same way I once didn't mean I didn't need them at all. It just meant I needed them in a different way. Uncovering the different layers of self helped me better identify the support I needed for growth and stability. The journey of life is one of self-discovery. It's about uncovering our story and sharing it to help the next person figure out their own, but not to be held captive by it. A person who is weighed down by heavy emotional baggage remains bound to earth. So in order to fly, we must learn to let go of the pain that weighs us down. And chasing someone else's dream won't relieve us from our nightmare. So embrace your story, embrace your pain, feel your pain, and never let anyone invalidate it. Because no one can tell you how to feel or deal with the pain who's never walked a mile in your shoes. Our pain is our power, and the heart is the source of that power. So surround yourself with good energy and people who make you feel good about yourself, those that make you feel like you can fly. And believe in others until they're able to believe in themselves. Live loud, live proud, and live life on nobody's terms but your own. Because one day, it'll all make sense. And that brings us to the end of this series. If you made it this far, thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope it's been as enlightening for you as it's been liberating for me. Just to recap, in the first episode, I talked about how the world is viewed differently by people raised on love versus people raised on survival. I then introduced Maslow's hierarchy of needs and used it as a roadmap to uncover deficiency needs in myself that created blocks to my personal growth. In episode 2, I introduced my experience with therapy after learning that I was unhappy and unfulfilled, which led me to uncover that my unhappiness was more than just about the end of a new relationship. Episode 3 helped me uncover the genesis of my broken heart and my foundation of self. I talked about the effects broken homes can have on our idea of self, as childhood is where we develop core beliefs about ourselves that carry us through life. In episode 4, I talked about how those core beliefs affect the relationships we build in adulthood, and how broken hearts filled with resentment can lead to toxic behavior and self-sabotage, as our hearts try to force our minds into relationships or situations we know aren't good for us, but pacify the wounds too painful to face on our own. Which led to episode 5, mental illness, where the effects of generational trauma finally caught up to me after being removed from an environment of chronic stress and unable to adapt to a world outside of survival. In episode 6, I entered spiritual warfare with the dark night of the soul, where I uncovered the imposter in my head causing my self-destructive behavior was a result of the shadow that grew from a lifetime of suppressed pain. In episode 7, I learned that only death could bring about new life, as I talked about my experience with grief and how to end my suffering, I would have to face the death of my ego, where I had to learn to let go of the false illusion of self created to protect my neglected inner child. Finally, in episode 8, Self-Actualization, I discovered the power of forgiveness and acceptance of myself, the good, bad, and ugly, and how redefining love for myself led to a personal relationship with God, where I discovered God within and purpose in my pain. Therapy helped me remove the blocks from my heart by reconnecting the broken connection to my mind, while the 7 chakras helped me unblock the energy centers in my body to restore balance in my life and harmony in my soul. Going back to my foundation to understand my past and the cycles of generational trauma I came from helped me make sense of my life in the present and restore hope for the future, as I learned that my past didn't define me. It simply informed the root causes of my emotional triggers, allowing me to stay present in a moment and be accountable for my own emotions while enjoying the company of others. My road to recovery from emotional trauma and mental illness was long and treacherous, but it was rewarding to wake up to find that the nightmare I lived was merely an inverted dream that had been altered by the lies trauma tells. But after discovering love for myself, I learned that life is whatever I choose to make it by the people, places, and things I choose to surround myself with. And this is the part of life where I live happily ever after. So as always, I hope you found this content enlightening, and if you learned something useful to take along your journey, you know what to do. Until we meet again, be safe, be love, be you. Drown out painful emotions responsibly.
Can't nobody help. Want somebody please come save me from myself. Finger trigger happy, I am the target. They say God's favorites got it the hardest. Maybe I'm chosen, I gotta believe someone checking for me, not just checking to see if I got what they need. Lord, please protect me from shit I can't see. An angel is falling, she offered me grace. Her heart to keep calling, but I'm in her space. I'm in too deep, I cannot be saved. She wanna walk down the same path that I paved, just to show me that I always been great, just to show me that I've been on my way. Answered the call, I got a new life. I traded my pain for a future that's bright. My turn my chain, light up the dark. Them vapors from papers, they give me the spark to know where to start, so I cannot lose. Can't calibrate sight cause they ain't paid they dues. 8-inch stilettos won't give them these views, so baby hold tight, we go into the moon.